Hi everyone, my name is Soha Jawani, and today I will be talking to you about crumbling cookie categories, deconstructing common cookie categories to create ones that people actually understand. So imagine you visit a website and you see a banner like this, because we've seen a lot of cookie banners today, and you want to make an informed decision on your privacy, so you want to look at these different cookies and make an informed decision on which ones you want on your browser. However, if you are like most people, you might get confused by these terms. You may not be sure about what strictly necessary is or what performance is, and we've seen that a lot of people struggle with this in previous research and in our own. These terms originally came from the International Chamber of Commerce of the United Kingdom in 2012. As far as we know, the terms have not been updated since. So what do these terms actually mean? Let's break it down. Let's get a definition. Strictly necessary cookies are the ones that are essential to navigate the website. So if you go on an e-commerce website, this is the cookie that will enable the shopping cart feature. Performance cookies collect information about the use of a website and in an aggregate form. So number of visits, what's the most popular web page on your website, all that jazz, these cookies are responsible for. Functional or functionality cookies are used to remember a user's preferences, so languages, font size, this falls in this category. Targeting or advertising cookies are the ones that help serve users personalized advertisements and records metrics. So if you're like me, you might have kept seeing an ad for a flight to Bristol. This cookie is responsible for that. So to figure out what cookies would serve us best, we had two research questions to help guide our study. The first one was what terms or phrases could best describe the 4 common cookie categories? The second being, do these terms or phrases provide a better understanding of cookie categories than the current industry standard? So we created a 4-phase methodology to try to answer these two questions. Our first phase was a survey for crowdsourcing new cookie terminology. So we would show participants a question like this, where we would show them the definition of a cookie. We would ask them what term or phrase they would suggest for the cookie, and then why they wrote that term or phrase. The second survey was a definition-based comprehension. We were trying to see whether or not the suggestions we got in survey 1 or whether or not the suggestions that we came up with ourselves were better alternatives than the original. So we would ask participants what are blank cookies, and they would select one of the options in the multiple choice. So we would show them what are strictly necessary cookies, and then they would have to select a definition. They could also select I don't know for these cookies. Survey 3 was scenario-based comprehension. So in this, we would ask participants to envision that they were visiting a website and which feature or which cookie they think enables a certain feature. So we would ask them what cookies would allow for a review to load, and then they would select the answer. Our last survey, we did a task-based user study in an e-commerce environment to try to simulate what it would be like in a real-world setting. Participants were led to a website where they were asked to add an item to a cart. During the process, they would see a cookie banner, and then later they would come back to the survey and we would ask them questions about it. So these are the 2 cookie banners that they would see, or one participant would see one of these, one participant would see another. The difference between the 2 are the terms that we used. So on one side, we had the original terms from the ICC UK Cookie Guide. So this is strictly necessary, performance, functional, advertising. On the other side, these were the alternatives that we came up with, and we tested a little bit in survey 2, a little bit in survey 3, and now again in survey 4. So our alternative slate of terms were necessary cookies, anonymous analytics, extra functionality, and personalized advertising. So let's jump right into our findings and recommendations. If you guys want to read any more about the survey, we go into them very in-depth in the paper. Our first recommendation is to rename function to extra functionality. When we were coming up with these recommendations, we were looking at things from both a comprehension aspect as well as a sentiment aspect. So here is a table from survey 3, which was our scenario survey. This is a snippet of a much larger table where we basically recorded what terms participants selected for certain questions. So the very first row here, that's what the correct answer was. And then the second row is the questions that correspond to it. So question 1, question 2, strictly necessary was the correct answer. Question 3, 4, and 5, functional was the correct answer. And here in the column, or the first column, we're looking at how often participants chose functional and extra functionality as answers for the 9 scenario questions. So while we were looking at how often functional or extra functionality were chosen when they were the correct answer, so how often they were chosen for question 3, 4, and 5, we were also looking at how often they were chosen incorrectly. So here we noticed there was a big difference in how often functional was getting confused for a strictly necessary category than extra functionality. So we see for functional, participants would choose the term functional 48.2% of the time for a strictly necessary question, versus extra functionality, which was only chosen 28% of the time. So we were led to believe that strictly necessary and extra functionality were not getting confused as much as functional and strictly necessary were. For performance, we noticed a similar trend where we looked at how often functional was chosen versus how often extra functionality was chosen incorrectly. So here we see in question 6 where performance categories are the right answer, functional would be chosen 18.52% of the time versus extra functionality would be chosen 8% of the time. We also looked at sentiment to see how participants felt like the terms fit the definitions. So here we saw that participants typically said that extra functionality fits somewhat well or fits very well. Our second recommendation is to rename performance to anonymous analytics. Again, we pulled this from survey 3, where we were looking at how often terms were chosen correctly and incorrectly. So we saw that performance was being more often confused with the functional category than anonymous analytics. We also saw that performance and anonymous analytics actually did not necessarily do that differently. For question 7, 59% of the time, participants chose performance. 62.7% of the time, participants chose anonymous analytics. However, we got really interesting insight here. So we ran survey 3 twice, and the second time we ran it, we actually asked participants why they selected certain answers. Here, we found that participants were choosing performance not because it was the correct answer. They did not have the correct reasoning as to why they were choosing this term. One participant mentioned that they think broken pages would fit under performance cookies because it's not showing up as intended. So they believe that these cookies are responsible for the performance of the web page. However, performance cookies are responsible for recording metrics. Again, we looked at the sentiment here to see how participants felt like the definition and the term fit together, and we saw that more participants thought that anonymous analytics fit the term very well, or fit the definition very well. Our third recommendation is to retain strictly necessary in advertising. We tested alternatives for both of these categories. However, we didn't find one that outperformed these two, so we believe that these are solid recommendations. We can just keep these two as is. Our fourth recommendation, which is probably one of the biggest that requires future work, is to revisit strictly necessary and functional categories. We noticed there was a lot of confusion throughout the process on participants trying to differentiate what would be strictly necessary and what would be functional. So we looked at this opinion from an EU Commission on what strictly necessary cookies are, and we found that a cookie is strictly necessary in order a cookie is strictly necessary if it enables a feature that a user explicitly requests. However, we saw participants were often confused. To be fair, like when you select a language on a website, that could be a functional cookie or a strictly necessary. It is a feature that a user is explicitly requesting. However, from the ICC cookie guide, we see that this would fall under the functional category. So there is like a bit of confusion there that we also saw with our participants. So participants would say something like, these reviews seem like a necessary element of the page. They're confused, they're trying to distinguish between what is necessary and what is functional. Another participant said, I'm not sure if it's necessary or extra functionality, but I'm leaning more towards this one since it seems a bit extra to remember my shopping choices. And lastly, another participant said, necessary cookies allow the most basic features of the website to work. So there is some struggle for participants to distinguish between what is strictly necessary and what is extra functionality. To sum up, here are all of our findings. I've also put the title of the paper below if you want to go take a read. There's a lot of data in there that you can look through yourself. I've also put my email on here if you want to email me any questions. Thank you all for your time. I will now open the floor for Q&A.
Thank you for nice talk. First, you said that you also let the users to collect you basically ideas what other classifications there were. There are many other categorizations provided by either the CMPs, basically at least one trust as the leading one is having, I think now like 12 categories or something like that. Was it matching to this? And secondly, this is my personal opinion. It feels always that the functionality category is created just for confused users from beginning and to get them clicks certain checkboxes. Would you agree completely discarding this category if it would be up to you based on your results?
I'm going to address the second one. I could see discarding the extra functionality. I was also like arguing with this, like while we were researching this, our group was arguing about this. I could see it just being discarded. It does seem like a lot of this could fall under strictly necessary. However, there are so many legal protections for strictly necessary category where like, you know, this is the one that they don't need to get consent for. I think it's tough to get rid of a whole category and then absorb it into this one that doesn't require consent. So that's why I think it would be better to do maybe further studies on this, see if there is a way that we can classify this maybe further that's more distinguishable for users. And then can you repeat your first question?
The categories that are used by CMPs, the larger number of categories, did you match these from the users that what they were proposing? Is it actually that maybe users are seeing some benefits of these multiple more categories, like social is one of the typical example? Were the users wanting these things?
Oh, that's a good question. When we asked for terms or phrases, we just showed the 4 cookie categories. We didn't get any notice or any asks for more categories or if they think there should be more categories. So I'm not sure about this. I think this was like the standard when we started working on this paper, but I'm sure like it evolves quickly.
Hi, thanks a lot. Great talk. So I have 2 questions. So first is about the anonymous analytics. I was just curious, how did you come up with this specific phrasing? Because we know that the analytics services are different. There are some who are more privacy preserving and others that are not. And maybe the phrasing anonymous analytics will give a wrong sense of privacy to the users. When they see the word anonymous, they would just say, oh yeah, well, that's great for us. But that's maybe not really the case. So this is the first question. And the second is more to refer to Karel's question. So basically the consent management providers are relying on the purposes defined in the IAB Europe Transparency and Consent Framework Standard, where there are these 12 purposes that are actually kind of present in the cookie banners in different ways, and that's why we see so many different variations of this. So maybe that's more not a question, but a recommendation to actually check those purposes, because those are very actively used in the banners that we're seeing. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for those questions. Or I guess your one question, we recommended anonymous analytics because when we were looking at the definition from the cookie guide, it seemed like it was showing data in an aggregate form, which did seem anonymous. So we looked at that term and we decided that that would be a good alternative.
We can have one more question.
Following up, I think the concern is that an aggregation happens on the server side, which means as a user, I may not be able to trust, or I have to trust. So I think that's maybe Natalia's concern, which I share. But great talk, thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for this feedback. I really appreciate it.
Well, maybe one last question.
Thanks. So how do we go about implementing these recommendations? Is there some organizations you can approach, or? Yeah.
I would think of approaching CMPs maybe, because a lot of websites go through CMPs for this consent management, for this cookie banners where they show the terms. So I would think maybe approaching a consent management platform could be good. Maybe also approaching regulators and showing these recommendations could also be another alternative.
Speaker.